The air inside Chicago's Symphony Hall felt thick with expectation that autumn evening. Outside, the city lights sparkled against the darkening sky. But inside, all eyes were fixed on the stage where dreams were about to be made or broken. The International Young Musicians Competition had been running for 3 decades, and tonight was the final round. 23 young musicians from 17 countries had made it this far, each one a prodigy in their own right. Backstage, 12-year-old Yuki Nakamura pressed her small hands together, trying to stop them from shaking. She could hear the muffled applause as the previous contestant finished their piece. The boy from Germany had just played Chopin with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of private lessons and concert hall performances. She peeked through a gap in the heavy burgundy curtains and saw the judges nodding approvingly, writing notes on their score sheets with satisfied expressions. Her stomach twisted into a knot. What was she doing here? A girl from a tiny fishing village in Japan, competing against kids who had trained at the world's best music schools since they could walk. She touched the small photograph in her dress pocket. The edges were worn from how many times she had held it. It showed an elderly woman with kind eyes sitting at an old piano. Yuki whispered a silent prayer to her memory. "Number 18, Yuki Nakamura from Japan." The announcer's voice boomed through the hall. This was it. No turning back now. Yuki stepped out from behind the curtain and the bright stage lights hit her like a physical force. She blinked, momentarily blinded, and heard a few scattered claps from the audience. The applause sounded polite but thin, nothing like the enthusiastic reception the German boy had received. She walked across the massive stage, her white dress simple and plain compared to the elegant gowns and suits the other contestants had worn. Her black shoes, which her mother had bought second-hand and polished until they shined, squeaked slightly on the wooden floor. The grand Steinway piano sat in the center of the stage like a sleeping giant. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen, its black surface so perfectly polished that she could see her reflection in it. Back home, she had practiced on Mrs. Tanaka's old upright piano with its chipped keys and slightly out-of-tune strings. She had gotten 30 minutes of practice time each week at the local community center, where the piano was better, but still nothing like this masterpiece before her. In the front row, 5 judges sat behind a long table. They had been listening to performances for 6 hours straight, and fatigue showed on some of their faces. The head judge, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit, glanced at his program, and then at Yuki. His eyebrows rose slightly. He leaned toward the woman sitting next to him, a celebrated pianist who had judged competitions around the world. They exchanged a look that Yuki couldn't quite read, but it made her feel smaller than she already was. The woman judge picked up her pen and tapped it against her notepad, then whispered something behind her hand. The man nodded and his lips curved into a barely concealed smile. Not a warm smile, but the kind that adults give when they find something amusing, in a way that isn't exactly kind. 2 seats down, another judge openly stifled a chuckle. He was younger than the others, probably in his 40s, with the kind of confident posture that came from years in the spotlight. He glanced at his watch, then at Yuki, then back at his watch again. The message was clear. Let's get this over with. Yuki felt heat rise to her cheeks. She knew what they were thinking. She had seen it before, at the regional competition, at the nationals, even during the preliminary rounds here in Chicago. She was too small, too plain, too ordinary-looking to be a serious musician. With her thick glasses that kept sliding down her nose, her nervous habit of biting her lower lip, and her complete lack of stage presence, she looked more like a student who had wandered into the wrong building than a world-class pianist. The audience seemed to sense the judge's skepticism. The rustling of programs and shifting in seats grew louder. Someone coughed. A phone buzzed and was quickly silenced. The energy in the room felt different than it had for the previous contestants. There was doubt in the air, thick and unmistakable. Yuki reached the piano bench and stood beside it for a moment, her hands clasped in front of her. The bench was too low. Of course it was. It had been adjusted for the tall German boy. She looked around, momentarily panicked, until a stagehand noticed and hurried out with the adjustment crank. The process took nearly a minute, and with each passing second, Yuki felt more exposed, more out of place. The silver-haired judge shifted in his seat and glanced at his colleagues again. This time his expression was one of mild impatience. He had heard hundreds of child prodigies over his career. He had discovered some genuine talents and sat through countless mediocre performances from children whose parents had pushed them into music without real aptitude. He prided himself on being able to spot the difference within the first few measures. And right now, everything about this small Japanese girl suggested she was about to waste everyone's time. Behind him in the audience, a talent scout from one of New York's prestigious music schools checked her phone, already mentally moving on to the next contestant. A music journalist in the third row finished typing notes about the German boy's performance, certain that he would be the one worth writing about. Finally, the bench was adjusted. Yuki sat down and her feet barely touched the pedals. She adjusted her position, sitting forward on the edge of the bench. Another small moment that made her look unprepared, amateurish. She placed her hands on her lap and closed her eyes, taking a breath so deep her shoulders rose and fell. The head judge picked up his pen, ready to mark his score sheet. He had already half decided on a score, somewhere in the middle range. Generous enough to not seem cruel, but honest enough to reflect what he expected to hear. A competent but unremarkable performance from an overambitious child. The audience settled into a kind of patient but unenthusiastic silence. A few people near the back were already gathering their coats, planning to slip out during the applause. Yuki opened her eyes and looked at the keys before her. 88 black and white keys that held infinite possibilities. She thought of Mrs. Tanaka, of those hundreds of afternoons in the small apartment that smelled like green tea and old books. She thought of her mother, working the night shift at the office building so Yuki could have this chance. She thought of the letter Mrs. Tanaka had left her, words she had memorized and carried in her heart every single day. Her fingers moved to the keys and hovered there for just a second. The judges waited, pens ready, some with expressions of thinly veiled amusement, others with professional but distant interest. Nobody in that hall could have possibly imagined what was about to happen. Nobody was prepared for the moment when those small, trembling fingers would finally touch the piano keys and change everything. The first note came so softly that some people in the back rows almost missed it. A single key, pressed with such delicate precision that it seemed to float through the air like a whisper. Then another note followed, and another, each one clear as crystal, each one carrying a weight that seemed impossible for such gentle sounds. Yuki had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most emotionally demanding pieces in classical music. It was a bold choice, perhaps even reckless for someone her age. The opening required not just technical skill, but a deep understanding of sorrow and hope intertwined. Most 12-year-olds couldn't possibly grasp that kind of emotional depth. But within the first 10 seconds, something in the hall shifted. The head judge's pen, which had been moving toward his score sheet, stopped mid-air. He tilted his head slightly, listening more carefully now. The smile that had been playing at the corners of his mouth faded completely. His eyes narrowed, not in skepticism anymore, but in concentration. Yuki's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed to contradict her nervous entrance just moments before. The notes built slowly, carefully, like someone telling a story they needed the world to hear. Her eyes were closed, her face completely serene now, as if she had stepped out of the bright lights and the judgment and into a place that belonged only to her and the music. The younger judge, who had checked his watch, stopped fidgeting. He leaned forward in his chair, his expression changing from boredom to curiosity. What was this? Where was this coming from? In the audience, the woman who had been gathering her coat let it fall back onto her seat. The journalist stopped scrolling through his phone and looked up at the stage. A middle-aged man in the fifth row, who had come only because his daughter was competing later, found himself gripping the armrests of his seat without realizing it. The music swelled. Yuki's right hand danced through a complex melody, while her left hand provided a foundation of deep, resonant chords. The technical difficulty was obvious to anyone who knew piano, but that wasn't what made people's breath catch in their throats. It was the feeling behind every note. Each phrase seemed to carry its own emotion, its own small story within the larger piece. The piece moved into a more intense section, and Yuki's whole body began to move with the music. Not in an exaggerated or performative way, but naturally, as if the music was flowing through her rather than from her. Her shoulders swayed gently. Her head tilted back slightly during the crescendos and bowed during the softer passages. The female judge, The celebrated pianist who had whispered to her colleague just minutes ago put down her pen entirely. She wasn't writing anymore. She couldn't. Her hands were clasped together and her eyes had grown wider. She had performed this same piece herself in concert halls around the world, and she knew every note, every challenge, every emotional peak and valley. What this child was doing was far beyond competent. It was far beyond even excellent. It was extraordinary. A woman in the third row felt tears prick at her eyes, though she couldn't explain why. She had come to support her nephew, who had been eliminated in the earlier rounds. She knew nothing about classical music. Found most of it boring, if she was being honest. But this was different. This reached past her ears and grabbed something deep in her chest. The music told a story of loss and longing, of darkness searching for light. Yuki's fingers flew across the keys now, moving so fast they became a blur. Yet every single note was clear and purposeful. Not one mistake. Not one hesitation. It was the kind of performance that required thousands of hours of practice, but practice alone couldn't create this. This required something else entirely. The head judge realized his mouth had fallen slightly open. He closed it, swallowed hard, and forced himself to maintain professional composure. But inside, his mind was racing. In 30 years of judging competitions, he had heard perhaps 5 or 6 performances that truly moved him. Performances that reminded him why he had fallen in love with music as a child. This was becoming one of them. The piece built toward a moment of pure anguish, a section where the pianist must convey complete heartbreak. Yuki's face, which had been peaceful, now showed something that looked almost like pain. But not physical pain. Something deeper. Her fingers pressed the keys with increasing urgency, and the sound that emerged was so raw, so vulnerable, that people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Not from boredom, but from the intensity of the emotion. A man in the back row, a piano teacher who had brought 3 of his students to learn from watching professionals, felt goosebumps rise on his arms. He had taught the basics of this piece to dozens of students over the years. He thought he knew it inside and out. But hearing it like this, he realized he had never truly understood it before. The talent scout from New York sat frozen, her phone forgotten in her lap. She was supposed to be objective, always professional, always looking for marketable talent. But right now, she wasn't thinking about auditions or scholarships or career potential. She was just listening, completely absorbed as this small Japanese girl poured what seemed like her entire soul into 88 keys. Then the music shifted. After the darkness and sorrow, a hint of hope began to emerge. The melody brightened, not suddenly but gradually, like dawn breaking after the longest night. Yuki's playing softened, became tender, almost fragile. She was telling the audience that even after loss, even after pain, beauty could still exist. Light could still find its way through. The judges weren't looking at their score sheets anymore. They weren't looking at each other. They were looking at Yuki, this child they had dismissed with smirks and whispers just minutes ago, and they were witnessing something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. The woman judge felt a tear slide down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She had built a reputation on being tough, on maintaining standards, on never letting emotion cloud her judgment. But some performances demanded tears. Some performances earned them. The piece entered its final movement, building toward the climax that would require every ounce of strength and skill Yuki possessed. Her hands moved across the entire range of the keyboard. From the deepest bass notes to the highest treble, the sound filled every corner of the massive hall, growing louder and more powerful with each measure. People in the audience forgot where they were. Forgot they were watching a competition. Forgot everything except the music pouring over them like a wave. Some had their eyes closed, letting the sound wash through them. Others stared at the stage in disbelief, unable to look away. The younger judge felt his heart pounding. He had been ready to dismiss this performance before it even began, had already decided this girl was out of her depth. The shame of that judgment hit him now like a physical force. Who was he to have doubted? What right did he have to look at someone and decide what they were capable of based on appearances? Yuki's face glowed with perspiration under the stage lights. Her arms must have been aching, her fingers surely tired from the relentless demands of the piece. But she showed no sign of fatigue. She played as if she had an infinite well of energy to draw from, as if she could continue forever. The music built higher and higher, the volume swelling until it seemed impossible that one person, one instrument, could create such a massive sound. The entire hall vibrated with it. Yuki's small frame somehow channeled an ocean of emotion and power through her fingertips. And then, with one final thunderous chord, she brought her hands down on the keys with absolute authority. The sound rang out, bold and triumphant and achingly beautiful. Yuki held the chord, her foot pressed on the sustain pedal, letting the note reverberate through the stunned silence. It seemed to hang in the air forever, filling every empty space, touching every heart. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted her hands from the keys. The last vibration of sound faded into nothing. Yuki opened her eyes and exhaled, as if she had been holding her breath underwater and finally broken the surface. The hall remained absolutely silent. Not a single person moved. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. The silence was so complete that Yuki could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She sat perfectly still at the piano, her hands now resting in her lap, suddenly aware of how sweaty her palms had become. Had she made a mistake? Had she disappointed everyone? The silence felt crushing, heavy with something she couldn't quite name. Then the head judge stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, breaking the spell. He brought his hands together once, twice, 3 times. The sound of his applause echoed through the hall like gunshots. And then, as if that was the signal everyone had been waiting for, the entire room exploded. The other judges shot to their feet. The female judge was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt, tears streaming freely down her face now, not caring at all about her carefully applied makeup. The younger judge, who had checked his watch, stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his water glass. His face had gone red and he was shaking his head slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just witnessed. The audience erupted like a dam had burst. People were on their feet, applauding, shouting, some crying openly. The sound was deafening, a wall of appreciation and awe that crashed over Yuki in waves. She stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky, and turned to face them all. The ovation grew even louder. A man in the back row was clapping so enthusiastically he dropped his program and didn't even notice. The woman in the 3rd row who had teared up during the performance was now sobbing, clutching her nephew's arm. The piano teacher had his hands pressed to his face, overwhelmed. The talent scout from New York was on her feet, applauding while simultaneously trying to pull out her phone to make notes, her fingers trembling. Yuki bowed, a deep traditional Japanese bow, and when she straightened up, she saw that her vision had gone blurry. She was crying too, not from sadness but from pure, overwhelming relief and gratitude. She bowed again, and the applause somehow grew even more thunderous. The head judge was shaking his head, a huge smile on his face. He looked at his fellow judges and said something, but his words were lost in the noise. The female judge nodded vigorously in response, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Even the most reserved judge at the end of the table, a stern-looking man who was known for never showing emotion, was clapping with vigor. His expression softened into something close to wonder. In the wings of the stage, the other contestants who had been waiting watched in shock. The German boy who had played Chopin stood with his mouth open, his confidence from earlier completely shaken. A girl from France who had been so sure of her chances felt her stomach drop. A boy from Brazil nudged his neighbor and whispered, "Did you hear that? Did you actually hear that?" They had all heard it. Everyone had heard it. And they all knew in that moment that the competition was over. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Yuki bowed a 3rd time, then a 4th. Her face was flushed, tears still streaming down her cheeks. She spotted someone in the 5th row, a young woman holding a sign that said, "We love you, Yuki," in both English and Japanese characters. The woman was crying too, jumping up and down while clapping. Yuki had never seen her before in her life, but somehow that made it even more meaningful. Finally, after nearly 2 full minutes, the applause began to fade. People slowly sat back down, though the energy in the room remained electric. The hall buzzed with excited whispers and murmurs. Yuki bowed one final time and walked off the stage, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The moment she stepped behind the curtain, her knees did buckle. A stagehand caught her arm gently, steadying her. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes kind. Yuki nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight with emotion. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," the stagehand said quietly. "And I've worked here for 15 years. Backstage, everything became a blur." Other contestants approached her, some congratulating her, others just staring in awe. The French girl came up and hugged her without saying a word. The German boy shook her hand, his expression a mix of respect and resignation. "That was incredible," he said simply, Meanwhile, out in the hall, the judges huddled together during the brief intermission. The head judge was speaking quickly, his usual composed demeanor replaced with animated excitement. In 30 years, I have never witnessed anything like that. Never. The female judge nodded, still dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The technical execution was flawless, but that's not even the remarkable part. The emotion, the depth of feeling. Where does a 12-year-old learn to play with that kind of soul? We need to know her story, the younger judge said. Someone doesn't just appear out of nowhere and play like that. There has to be something behind it. They pulled out Yuki's application form, reading through it for details they had barely glanced at before. Born in a small village in Japan, no prestigious music school listed. No famous teachers. Her instructor was listed simply as private tutor, deceased. The address was for a modest apartment in a town none of them had heard of. How is this possible? One judge asked, genuinely confused. Without formal conservatory training, without the resources, how did she reach this level? The head judge set down the paper and looked at his colleagues seriously. That's what makes it even more remarkable. This isn't the product of privilege or opportunity. This is pure, undeniable talent combined with dedication we can't even imagine. Out in the audience, word was already spreading. The journalist who had almost ignored Yuki's performance was now typing frantically on his laptop, rewriting his entire article. The headline was practically writing itself. The talent scout from New York was on her phone, speaking urgently to someone at her office. I don't care what the budget constraints are. We need to offer this girl a full scholarship. Full ride, everything included. If we don't, someone else will. In the lobby during intermission, everyone was talking about the same thing. People who had been strangers 5 minutes ago were now discussing Yuki's performance like old friends. I've never felt anything like that, one woman said to another. My whole body was covered in chills. Did you see the judges' faces? A man laughed. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. A beautiful, talented ghost. Social media had already caught fire. Someone in the audience had recorded a few seconds of the performance on their phone, despite the no recording policy. The clip was being shared rapidly across platforms, views climbing by the thousands every minute. Comments poured in from people around the world. Who is this girl? I'm crying and I only heard 10 seconds. This is what perfection sounds like. The judges laughed at her and then she did that. Back in the waiting area, Yuki sat alone for a moment, her hands still trembling. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the worn photograph of Mrs. Tanaka. She stared at it, her vision blurring with fresh tears. I did it, she whispered in Japanese. I showed them. Just like you said I should. A volunteer approached her with a bottle of water. Drink this, honey. You need to stay hydrated. You still have the awards ceremony later. Yuki accepted the water gratefully, though she could barely hold the bottle steady. The awards ceremony felt like a formality now. Everyone in that building knew who had won. But there was still the official announcement to come, and more than that, there was the question of what would happen next. Because something had shifted tonight. Not just for Yuki, but for everyone who had witnessed what happened on that stage. They had seen someone transform from a dismissed nobody into a somebody right before their eyes. They had learned a lesson about judgment and assumption and the danger of deciding what people are capable of based on how they look. The head judge stood in the wings, watching Yuki from a distance. He felt a deep sense of shame remembering his smirk from earlier, the way he had dismissed her before she played a single note. He had been in this business long enough to know better. Yet even he had fallen into the trap of surface-level judgment. He walked over to where Yuki sat. She looked up at him, her eyes red from crying and tensed slightly. Young lady, he said, his voice gentle, I owe you an apology. Yuki blinked in surprise. I judged you before you played. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What you did out there, that was more than music. That was art in its purest form. Thank you for reminding me why I love this. Yuki's lip trembled. She bowed her head respectfully. Thank you, sir. As he walked away, Yuki felt something settle in her chest. A sense of peace she hadn't expected. Whatever happened next, whatever the judges decided, she had kept her promise. She had played from her heart, just as Mrs. Tanaka had taught her, and the world had listened. The remaining performances that evening felt like echoes after thunder. Each contestant played beautifully, technically perfect in their own right. but everyone in the hall knew they were merely going through the motions now. The competition was already decided. When the last performer finished and took their bow, the judges gathered their notes and retreated to the deliberation room. The audience filed out slowly, still talking about Yuki's performance in hushed, reverent tones. But while they discussed what they had witnessed, none of them knew the real story behind the girl who had just changed everything. That story began 8 years earlier, in a small coastal village in Japan, where the houses clustered together like old friends and everyone knew everyone else's business. Yuki had been only 4 years old when her father's fishing boat didn't come home one night. The storm had been sudden and fierce, the kind that old fishermen said came from the anger of the sea itself. 3 boats went out that morning. Only 2 returned. Her mother, Akiko, had been left alone with a 4-year-old daughter and a mountain of debt from the boat her husband had been buying. She took 2 jobs, then 3. During the day, she worked at the village market weighing fish and handling money. In the evenings, she cleaned offices in the nearby town, taking the bus that came twice a day. At night, after Yuki was supposed to be asleep, she mended fishing nets by hand for extra money, her fingers raw and bleeding by morning. Little Yuki spent most of her time alone in their tiny apartment, a place so small you could touch both walls with your arms stretched out. She learned to be quiet, to entertain herself, to not be a burden. She would stand on a stool at the window and sing songs she made up, watching the ocean that had taken her father, and wondering if he could hear her wherever he was. One evening, an elderly woman named Mrs. Tanaka who lived in the apartment below heard that singing. She was 73 years old with hands twisted by arthritis and a past she rarely spoke about. She climbed the stairs slowly, her knees protesting with each step, and knocked on the door. When little Yuki answered, Mrs. Tanaka saw a child with enormous eyes and a sadness that didn't belong on such a young face. "You have a beautiful voice," Mrs. Tanaka said, gently. "Would you like to see something special?" Yuki nodded, curious. Mrs. Tanaka led her downstairs to her own apartment, which was just as small but filled with books and old photographs. And in the corner, covered with a faded cloth, sat an upright piano. It wasn't fancy. The wood was scratched. Some of the keys were chipped, and it hadn't been tuned in years. But to Yuki it looked like a treasure chest. "Do you know what this is?" Mrs. Tanaka asked. Yuki shook her head, reaching out one small finger to touch a key. The note that came out was slightly flat, but to her it sounded like magic. "Would you like to learn?" From that day forward, every evening after her mother left for work, Yuki would go downstairs to Mrs. Tanaka's apartment. What nobody in the building knew, what Mrs. Tanaka had never told anyone, was that she had once been a concert pianist. Not famous, but skilled enough to have played in Tokyo's smaller halls, talented enough to have dreamed of bigger stages, but life had dealt her unexpected cards. A marriage to a man who grew jealous of her talent, children who needed her, and then the arthritis that came in her 50s, stealing her ability to play, forcing her to watch her dreams slip away like water through cupped hands. She had moved to this small village to be near her daughter's family, and the piano had come with her, more out of habit than hope. Now, looking at this small, sad child who sang to the ocean, Mrs. Tanaka felt something wake up inside her that she thought had died years ago. She couldn't play anymore. Her fingers wouldn't obey. But she could teach. For the first year, they didn't even work on real pieces. Mrs. Tanaka taught Yuki about emotion, about what music meant. "The piano is not about pressing keys," she would say in Japanese, her voice firm but kind. "It's about telling stories without words. It's about taking everything inside your heart and letting it out through your fingertips." Yuki learned scales and finger exercises, but more importantly, she learned to pour her loneliness into the music. The missing of her father, the worry about her mother, the long hours of being alone, all of it went into the piano. By the time Yuki was 7, she could play simple pieces from memory. By 8, she was working on compositions that students twice her age struggled with. Mrs. Tanaka pushed her gently but firmly, always demanding more feeling, more depth, more truth. "Technical perfection is easy to find," Mrs. Tanaka would tell her, "but music that touches the soul, that is rare. That is what you must aim for." The old upright piano with its flat keys became Yuki's best friend, her confidant, her escape from a world that often felt too heavy for such small shoulders. But it wasn't enough. The piano was falling apart, more keys going out of tune every month. Yuki needed practice time on a better instrument. Her mother found out what was happening and felt torn. She had no money for music lessons, no money for piano practice. But she saw something in Yuki's eyes when she talked about music, a light that hadn't been there before. So Akiko worked harder, took on a fourth job helping to clean the local school on weekends. She saved every yen she could spare. After 6 months, she had enough to buy Yuki 30 minutes a week at the community center where they had a better piano. Just 30 minutes. It wasn't much, but Yuki treated those minutes like they were made of gold. She would prepare all week with Mrs. Tanaka on the old upright, and then on Saturday mornings, she would go to the community center and play on the better piano, making every second count. The other children in the village thought she was strange. While they played outside or watched television, Yuki practiced piano. While they gossiped and formed friendships, Yuki lost herself in music. She didn't mind being different. The piano didn't judge her for being poor or for not having a father. The piano just let her be herself. Mrs. Tanaka saw something special developing in her young student. It wasn't just talent, though Yuki had plenty of that. It was the way the girl understood music on a level that couldn't be taught. She felt it in her bones, in her blood. When she played sad pieces, you could hear real sadness. When she played joyful ones, the happiness was genuine. "You have a gift," Mrs. Tanaka told her one evening when Yuki was 10 years old. "Not just in your fingers, but in your heart. Never lose that, no matter what anyone says about you." As Yuki improved, Mrs. Tanaka encouraged her to enter competitions. Local ones at first, just small contests at the community center or the nearby town. Yuki would show up in her worn clothes, and other children would look at her with barely concealed pity or disdain. Then she would play, and their expressions would change. She started winning. First place in the regional competition. First place in the prefecture contest. Each win brought a small cash prize that she immediately gave to her mother to help with bills. But more than the money, the wins brought something else. Attention. A music teacher from a school in Tokyo saw her play at the prefecture competition and told Mrs. Tanaka that Yuki should be studying at a conservatory, getting proper training. But conservatories cost money they didn't have. The teacher offered to make some calls to see about scholarships, but Mrs. Tanaka shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "She's not ready for that world." What she meant was that Yuki still had more to learn about life, about pain and joy and loss, because all of that would make her music deeper, richer, more real. Technical training could come later. First, she needed to understand what it meant to be human. When Yuki was 11, Mrs. Tanaka fell ill. The arthritis had spread, and now other health problems were adding up. She spent more time in bed, but still she insisted that Yuki come for lessons. Even when she was too weak to sit up for long, she would lie on the couch and listen to Yuki play, offering corrections and encouragement in a voice that grew softer each week. "Promise me something," Mrs. Tanaka said one afternoon, her breathing labored. "Promise me you'll never stop playing. And promise me that one day, you'll show the world what a girl from a small village can do." Yuki, fighting back tears, promised. 6 months later, on a quiet spring morning, Mrs. Tanaka passed away in her sleep. Yuki found out when her mother told her after school, and she ran down to the apartment below. The piano was still there, covered with its faded cloth, but the woman who had given her everything was gone. At the funeral, Yuki played a piece on the old church organ, one that Mrs. Tanaka had loved. She played through tears, through grief so heavy she could barely breathe, but she played, because that's what Mrs. Tanaka would have wanted. A week later, Mrs. Tanaka's daughter came to clean out the apartment. She found an envelope with Yuki's name on it, sealed and set aside deliberately. Inside was a letter and something else. An application form for the International Young Musicians Competition in Chicago, already filled out, and a check for the application fee, one of the last things Mrs. Tanaka had done before she got too sick. The letter said simply, "Show them what you can do. Make me proud. I will be listening." That was 6 months ago. 6 months of practice on the community center piano, of working with a new teacher who was kind but couldn't understand Yuki the way Mrs. Tanaka had. 6 months of her mother working even harder to save money for the plane ticket to America. 6 months of doubt and determination mixed together. And now, sitting backstage at Symphony Hall in Chicago, Yuki understood why Mrs. Tanaka had made her promise. This wasn't just about music. This was about showing that dreams don't require wealth or privilege. They require heart, dedication, and someone who believes in you. Mrs. Tanaka had believed in her, and Yuki had just proven that belief was justified. The awards ceremony was scheduled for 9 o'clock that evening, but the judges had made their decision in less than 15 minutes. There was no debate, no discussion needed. For the first time in the competition's 30-year history, all 5 judges had written the same number on their score sheets, a perfect 10. When Yuki walked onto the stage for the ceremony, she looked even smaller than before. She had changed into a different dress, this one borrowed from another contestant because she had only brought one nice outfit to America. The French girl had insisted, finding something that fit reasonably well, though it was still a bit too long. The hall was packed now, even more crowded than during the performances. Word had spread through Chicago's music community like wildfire. People who hadn't even attended the competition had rushed over, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl everyone was talking about. The video clip from someone's phone had already reached over 2 million views online, and the numbers were climbing every minute. All 23 contestants stood in a line on the stage. The head judge walked to the microphone and the room fell silent. He looked different now than he had at the beginning of the evening. Less formal, more human. His silver hair was slightly mussed and his eyes were still red-rimmed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying through the hall. "In 3 decades of judging this competition, I have never been more honored to present these awards." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Tonight, we witnessed something that reminded us all why music matters. Why it has the power to cross every border, every language, every barrier we create between ourselves and others." The audience murmured in agreement. He announced the 3rd-place winner first, then the 2nd. Both were excellent musicians who played beautifully. On any other night, either of them might have taken 1st place, but not tonight. "And now for 1st place," the judge said, and Yuki felt her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The winner of the International Young Musicians Competition, by unanimous decision of all judges, with the first perfect score in this competition's history. The pause felt like it lasted forever. Yuki Nakamura from Japan. The hall exploded again, just as it had after her performance. People were on their feet, applauding and cheering. Some were even whistling. Yuki walked forward on shaking legs to accept the trophy, a beautiful crystal piano that caught the stage lights and sparkled like stars. The head judge handed it to her, then did something unexpected. He bowed to her, a deep, respectful bow that judges simply didn't give to contestants. The other judges stood and bowed as well. The gesture said more than words ever could. "We were wrong about you, and we are honored to have heard you play." Yuki bowed back, clutching the trophy, tears streaming down her face. The female judge stepped forward and hugged her, whispering in her ear, "You have a gift that comes along once in a generation. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that." As the applause continued, Yuki looked out into the audience and spotted her mother standing in the back. Akiko had taken 3 buses and a train to get there from the modest hotel where they were staying, working an extra shift at the fish market before flying to America to afford the trip. She was wearing her only nice dress, the one she wore to important occasions, and she was crying so hard her whole body shook. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and Yuki saw everything in her mother's face. The exhausted nights, the bleeding fingers from mending nets, the meals skipped so Yuki could eat, the dreams deferred so her daughter could chase her own. All of it had led to this moment. After the ceremony ended, chaos erupted backstage. Representatives from music schools surrounded Yuki and her mother. The woman from Juilliard pushed her way to the front, speaking urgently. "Full scholarship, everything included. Housing, meals, the best teachers in the world. Please just say you'll consider it." A man from a conservatory in Boston was equally insistent. Someone from a school in London had flown in just for the finals and was making offers. Record label executives were leaving business cards. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell her story. Akiko looked overwhelmed, holding tight to Yuki's hand as if her daughter might be swept away in the current. The head judge noticed their distress and stepped in, his voice firm. "Everyone, please. This young lady has had a long day. Give the family some space." The crowd reluctantly backed off, though business cards continued to appear in their direction. That night, in their small hotel room with its 2 narrow beds and flickering television, Yuki and her mother sat together in the quiet. The trophy sat on the dresser, catching light from the street below, "What do you want to do?" Akiko asked in Japanese, stroking her daughter's hair. Yuki was quiet for a long moment. "I want to keep learning. I want to become better, but—" She hesitated. "But what, sweetheart?" "I don't want to forget where I came from. I don't want to forget Mrs. Tanaka, or our village, or why I started playing in the first place." Her mother pulled her close. "Then we'll make sure you don't." Over the next few weeks, Yuki's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The video of her performance went viral, reaching over 50 million views. News outlets around the world ran stories about the girl from the small fishing village who had silenced the American judges. In Japan, she became a national sensation overnight. The Prime Minister sent a congratulatory letter. Her village hung banners welcoming home their champion. But what moved Yuki most were the letters from ordinary people. Thousands of them poured in from around the world. A girl in India wrote that Yuki's story inspired her to keep practicing violin, even though her family was poor. A boy in Brazil said he had been ready to give up on music, but seeing Yuki's performance made him want to try again. A grandmother in Australia wrote that she had cried listening to the performance, remembering her own dreams of being a musician when she was young. Yuki read every letter she could, and they reminded her of something Mrs. Tanaka used to say: "Music is not for the musician, it's for everyone who hears it." After careful consideration, Yuki accepted the scholarship to Juilliard. But she and her mother made an agreement with the school. Every summer, Yuki would return to Japan for 3 months. Not for vacation, but to teach. She established the Mrs. Tanaka Music Foundation, funded partially by the competition's prize money and partially by donations that flooded in after her story became known. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide free music lessons to children in small villages and towns across Japan, children who would never otherwise have access to training. The old upright piano from Mrs. Tanaka's apartment became the foundation's symbol. Yuki had it shipped to a community center in her village, fully restored and tuned. A plaque on it read, "For the children who dare to dream," in memory of Mrs. Tanaka, who taught that music lives in the heart, not in the hands. The first summer Yuki returned to teach, 30 children showed up. Some walked for miles to attend. She taught them the way Mrs. Tanaka had taught her. That technique matters, but feeling matters more. That music is a language everyone can speak if they learn to listen to their hearts. One little boy, shy and quiet, reminded her of herself. He came from a family of farmers and his hands were calloused from helping in the fields. But when he touched the piano keys for the first time, his face lit up like sunrise. "Do you think I could learn to play like you?" he asked Yuki, his voice barely above a whisper. Yuki knelt down to his level and smiled. "You know what someone once told me? She said that music isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about how much of yourself you're willing to give to it." The boy nodded seriously, taking in her words. "If you practice hard and play from your heart," Yuki continued, "there's no limit to what you can do." Years passed. Yuki graduated from Juilliard at the top of her class. She performed in concert halls around the world, from Sydney to London to Tokyo. Critics called her one of the finest pianists of her generation. She won awards and accolades, graced magazine covers, played for presidents and queens. But every summer, without fail, she returned to that small coastal village where it all began. She taught the children of fishermen and farmers, of shop owners and bus drivers. She showed them that dreams don't require privilege or perfect circumstances. They just require dedication, heart, and someone who believes in you. The shy boy with calloused hands from that first summer eventually won a national competition himself. When reporters asked him who inspired him, he said simply, "Yuki-sensei showed me that it doesn't matter where you start. It matters where you're willing to go." 10 years after that night in Chicago, a journalist asked Yuki what she remembered most about the competition. She thought for a long moment before answering. "I remember being scared," she said honestly. "I remember the judges laughing at me before I played. But mostly I remember the moment I touched those piano keys and forgot about everything except the music. In that moment, I wasn't a poor girl from a small village. I wasn't someone people dismissed or overlooked. I was just music." She paused, looking out the window at the ocean visible in the distance. Mrs. Tanaka used to say that music is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about your background or your bank account. It only cares about truth. That night in Chicago, I finally understood what she meant. The journalist asked one more question. What would you say to the judges who laughed at you? Yuki smiled, the same gentle smile that had won hearts around the world. I would thank them, because they taught me something important. They taught me that other people's doubts don't define you. Your own determination does. And sometimes being underestimated is the greatest gift, because it makes your victory that much sweeter. In the end, Yuki's story wasn't just about a girl who won a competition. It was about the power of dedication, the importance of believing in yourself when nobody else does, and the truth that talent can bloom anywhere if given the chance. And every summer, in a small coastal village in Japan, children gather around an old upright piano with chipped keys and slightly flat notes, and they learn that with heart and hard work, even the impossible becomes possible. Mrs. Tanaka would have been proud.